Okay, good afternoon. Welcome to the Miala Annual Conference virtual breakout session. I am your session moderator, Mike Duffy. I have a few housekeeping items to share with you. We ask that you keep your microphone on mute until you need to ask a question. And you might also consider muting your video so the presenters will be visible on the screen. You can ask your questions at any time by entering them into the chat panel, and we'll be saving all questions until the end of the presentation. After this session, please take a moment to provide feedback to our presenters by filling out the session's evaluation form located in the conference portal. Today's presentation is a different view of the library, where collaboration meets innovation. And your presenters are Ann Kucera, Carrie Schrenka, and Haitham Dali. So now you can go ahead and give your presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And thanks everybody for coming. We can go to the first slide. Our main topic is going to be user experience testing with eye tracking glasses. And we're also going to talk about the expected and unexpected benefits of collaborating with a faculty member outside of the library. Next. In the spring of 2019, we learned about a department using eye tracking glasses, and we asked them if we could use the glasses in our usability studies. They said, let's meet. And in the end, we got much more than we bargained for. We're going to share our journey with you, and we're hoping to provide inspiration and start a conversation about what makes a good or great collaboration possible. Could we design a collaboration to make it more successful than we would expect? And we're interested to know if you've had similar experiences, and if so, what do you think were the secret ingredients of your success? When we think about collaboration, we're working with others to produce or create something. Typically, we collaborate to leverage the skills of others and to support each other. The ideal collaborations make a large or difficult job much easier. In this case, we knew we wanted something to use the eye tracking glasses. And then we were actually thrilled when we met with Professor Julie Zwo and found out we could provide something that she needed as well. With synergy, we're combining or coordinating to produce a joint effect that's greater than the sum of their separate effects. So 1 + 1 = 3 instead of 2. We'll discuss the benefits created by synergy in upcoming slides. I had looked for published library literature that discussed collaborations between the library and other academic units. The articles I found covered services such as library instruction, information and digital literacy, and research and reference. I did not find any articles about collaborations like the one that developed in our project. To give you some background about user experience in our library, we have had a user experience committee at our library since 2016. It has representatives from every department on it, and we conduct feedback sessions with students usually 6 times every year. The student feedback sessions have helped us to identify problem areas, and most importantly, it has inspired many cross-departmental conversations. Our testing protocols are very simple. They're based on techniques from Steve Krug's Rocket Surgery Made Easy. It is not scientific, but it does help us see our website and services from the student's perspective. We can uncover blind spots, and over time, we've made adjustments to Krug's protocols. We do not have a user experience librarian or other staff that's dedicated solely to user experience. It's something that many of us work on as part of our jobs. Because we have limited time, we've chosen to work from the perspective of exposing blind spots versus taking the time to set up and analyze more elaborate user testing.
The user experience testing and training that our library conducts have helped our staff to remain curious. We are open to new opportunities and are on the lookout for ways to improve our users' experience when engaging with our library building and website. In spring of 2019, Ann and I attended an on-campus student creative and research endeavors exhibition, also known as SPREE, which is a large poster session of graduate and undergraduate projects. Anne happened to know one of the students that was presenting, and she was graduating from the fashion merchandising program at CMU. And her research project was about how she used eye tracking technology to test the effectiveness of storefront window displays. Hytham, Anne, and I chair our library's user experience committee, and we thought about how the glasses might be an interesting tool to test the library website. We also explored their potential to analyze physical spaces within the library. We were put in contact with Professor Julie Zwo, who is an interior design instructor from CMU's Fashion and Merchandising and Design Department. And this is where our story of collaboration and synergy begins. We want to make clear before we go any further that the process that we are going to share with you was not an academic endeavor. The synergy that took place in our story happened on its own, and we didn't set out to make it happen. Our collaboration with Professor Zwo created a foundation from which several academic endeavors have indeed followed. And along the way, Professor Zwo noticed that there weren't many published articles on the utilization of eye tracking technology to analyze physical spaces, and saw the potential to move in that direction once she was able to perfect her skills of the technology and tools. After working on this project, we now see potential for studying and analyzing what makes a successful collaboration. The Fashion, Merchandising, and Design Department at CMU is known for utilizing cutting-edge technology in their programs and courses. And at the time we met Professor Zwo, she was beginning to plan a research study using eye tracking technology and welcomed the opportunity to learn more about how the hardware and software worked when applied to a real-time project. So this chart shows what both groups brought to the table during our collaboration. Both our library and Professor Zwo had specific tools and expertise that the other needed and could leverage from collaboration. This supports the idea that we indeed had a symbiotic or mutually beneficial relationship. Both the staff from the libraries and Professor Zwo were able to leverage the expertise and resources of the other. Staff in the library did not train on how to use the eye tracking glasses for testing, and we leveraged Professor Zwo's expertise for that. Professor Zwo did not train about how to conduct user experience testing in the library. She left it to our group to leverage processes we already had in place. Even after conducting the testing, our staff doesn't know everything about eye tracking technology. In this process, however, we were both adaptable, curious, we asked questions, we communicated, and we were open to new opportunities. Realized synergistic outcomes appear below the graphic, and we of course had expected outcomes from working together, but many unexpected outcomes have stemmed from our collaboration with Professor Zwo. We have set the groundwork for the possibility of even more projects to collaborate on together, and we are very excited about those possibilities.
So eye tracking is a sensor technology that measures eye activities and visual attention. In our study, we measure these activities using an eye tracker such as the glasses pictured. The eye tracker records the position and movement of the eyes in relation to the environment captured by the camera on the front of the tracker. And next slide. So we settled on what we thought was a relatively simple test for our first time using the eye tracking glasses. Whether patrons preferred facets in our library's discovery layer on the left side of the screen or on the right side of the screen. The facet test limited us to a single, albeit scrolling page of content to track information on. We had to consider the vision restrictions of participants when we were recruiting students, such as glasses or contacts. We asked participants with contacts if they would wear a pair of glasses to their testing, as we weren't certain how contacts would interact with the eye tracking software. We also considered the time it would take to calibrate the eye tracking glasses to each participant. The calibration process required a proper fitting to ensure comfort and security on the participant's face, as well as a tracking test to ensure the software was accurately tracking their gaze. In total, we tested 11 participants, 5 tested with facets on the right, and 6 tested with facets on the left.
Okay, this is Anne again. I realized we didn't say who we were when we were talking. So when we were our setup for testing, we used 2 different testing rooms, In the first room, students wore eye tracking glasses, and we recorded the student searching with either the facets on the right or facets on the left. Professor Zwo was running the technology, and we were asking the questions. Then we took them to a second room, and we asked people to compare their experience doing searches with facets on the left to facets on the right. So in the second room, they did both. Then we asked them which they preferred, facets on the left or right. And then again, the second room, they did not have the glasses. Okay, so here's an example of a typical heat map recorded in room 1 from somebody looking at the search results with facets on the right. Note that the green areas are representing where they would be looking, and they tend to cluster on the left and a little bit around the search bar. Something interesting here is that we noticed that even though the students' gaze tended to cluster to the left, these students said they preferred facets on the right. And this slide is an example of a typical heat map from someone looking at the search results with facets on the left. Notice that their gaze does land in the facets area. Here again, the students who used the eye tracking glasses to test the facets on the left said they preferred facets on the left. On the next slide, we looked at some numbers in Primo Analytics last week. Based on the frequency of facet use as a percentage of total searches, it seems like we've seen an increase in facet use. So the total basic plus advanced searches is the number of searches, not the number of people searching, which that's one of many caveats for this slide. So the next one is that if somebody used several facets in their search, those facets are included in the total facet events. So we can't say that, for example, in August 2019, 16% of the searches use facets. It does appear, though, that people are using the facets more often now that the facets are positioned on the left.
In preparation for testing, we made iterative changes to our testing documents. So why is this important? In planning conversations with Professor Zwo, she asked questions that helped us look critically at our user experience process. An example of some of the small changes we made would be that prior to live user experience testing, we shared the questions with library staff who would be observing. And we now include our rationale along with the questions that are being asked so that the observers can gain a better understanding of why specific questions were selected, and also helps measure how the questions are being asked to ensure we are satisfied with the level or amount of feedback that we receive. We also created pre and post test questionnaires. Prior to eye tracking testing, we had intro and exit questions. And for this particular testing, we decided to create a formal questionnaire. Participants now answer a set of questions verbally at the beginning of the session and fill out the post-test questions with a pen and paper at the end, and notable items are discussed. An example of a question we ask at the beginning and the end is, do you experience any roadblocks in your research process? We found that most participants would say, none that I can think of at the beginning of the test. And by the end, many can remember at least one roadblock that they have run into, and it can be further discussed. Another notable change that we made was that we verbally asked the participant to tell us what services they use in the library. And then at the end, they need to circle what services they have used. And often the responses at the beginning and the end of the testing are very different. The outcomes of our collaboration included Professor Zwo's research project. In working with Professor Zwo on the eye tracking project, she remained inspired to learn more about how to apply eye tracking technology and provided suggestions for the entrance to the libraries or to one of our library study rooms. She ended up choosing the entrance as a focus of her classwork and her research project. We learned about using eye tracking technology for user experience testing and have been able to add it to our tool belt. We have built relationships that will help us have access to the technology and software if we need it for future usability studies. From conducting the testing, we found that we were able to make a final decision about right versus left facet placement within our library smart search. And we knew that the testing would be able to provide heat map and eye tracking data that could help us make a final decision on what side our facets should be on. We also gained insight on the participants' roadblocks that they have experienced when conducting research from the pre and post-test questions. And as previously discussed, we were able to strategically and critically review the library's user experience processes and make small iterative adjustments as needed.
We had quite a few unexpected outcomes from our collaboration. We discovered there was an inherent problem in asking what is preferred. Participants had a tendency to prefer what they were just tested for. In this case, participants testing facets on the right side had a tendency to state they preferred the facets on the right, despite the eye tracking information supporting a preference for the facets on the left side. Preferences don't necessarily indicate usability. For Professor Zhuo's research project, she was interested in using the eye tracking technology in a real space, and we proposed a study space in our library for testing. The study space remains locked at all times and requires students to use a card tap point to access. Library staff noticed students were having trouble figuring out how to access the study room, so Professor Zhuo used the eye tracking glasses in the entrance space with students that had never visited the library. And this offered a stunning insight as to where students were looking when they approached the space. You can see the tap access point I was referring to circled in red in this photo. The data students gathered through their use of the eye tracking glasses in their assignment showed a consistent pattern of where their gaze was landing. On average, students looked in 6 locations before arriving at the card tap. Their gaze would drift from above the door, to the door handle, to the left and right of the doors, and finally to the card tap. Students in Professor Zhuo's class then used this data for a class project to design new signs for the area. Professor Zhuo asked Carrie to work with her Digital Fundamentals for Interior Design course as a guest lecturer and provide feedback for student critiques for 2 semesters. This course introduces students to interior design best practices by teaching them creative problem solutions, typography, and design skills. It provided the students and library staff useful eye tracking data that helped both groups understand the challenges, opportunities, and potential of the space. We were able to see the study room entrance from the students' perspective, and the students were happy to have a real-life case study to work on for a real client. At the end of the second semester, a final design proposal was created by Carrie that included a combination of ideas gathered from the students' final projects. The design is set to be installed this summer. Another amazing outcome from this collaboration can be seen here. CMU student Piper Moffett created this poster presentation based on their work from the case study provided in the course. The presentation illustrates Piper's analysis of the eye tracking study, her hypothesis of how people use the space, and a proposed design mock-up for the study room space that offers their solution as to how to solve wayfinding and user pain points through design and signage. Their presentation also outlined necessary adjustments for application in the real space and the students' takeaways from the wayfinding process. Our library study room project inspired us to look critically at some of our other library spaces and current signage. We are in the process of collaborating with other university partners to update current signage and in some cases, add more directional signs to help improve our patrons' experience. So our takeaways. At the start of this project, we were excited to learn about eye tracking technology, and testing facet preferences was a simple process that facilitated our use of the eye tracking glasses. We had an opportunity to leverage this cutting-edge technology to gain metrics we could never achieve through questioning alone. And the process of learning was mutual. We all learned from one another at every stage of the process, and the project was a success. The information we collected on facet preferences played a direct role in our decision to swap the facets from the right side of the screen to the left. But as we began to prepare for this presentation, we realized that one of the most important takeaways was about the synergy that occurred through our collaboration. Academic libraries create a foundation of learning and curiosity for all academic areas that extend beyond the parameters of standard research. We were able to bring our skills and expertise to the table and provide real-world experiences that students could benefit from directly. We believe there's a great opportunity and, more importantly, value in exploring how libraries can collaborate and synergize with others. So we ask, do any of you have stories that reflect this type of collaboration and synergy? If you're doing work like this, we encourage you to talk about it. Share the information with others. If you're not doing something like this, would you be interested in a collaboration? Are you interested in what makes a good collaboration? We were fortunate enough to stumble into this amazing collaboration that synergized into something far greater than its original intent. And we're confident that each of us have something to contribute to future collaborations to turn them into something that is so much more than they set out to be. And this is our side for more links. We provided a couple links. The first one is just for Steve Krug's Rocket Surgery Made Easy, which we use as a guide for our testing procedures. And the second one is for the specific brand of eye tracking glasses that we use throughout our collaboration. And there's our contact information. If anyone is interested in collaborating and they want to get in contact with us, please feel free. And I believe that is it. Questions?
So I'd like to encourage the audience to ask questions at this time. You can unmute yourself and ask a question, or go ahead and type the question into the chat, please. Well, seeing no questions, I suppose I'll ask one about the heat maps that you made. What do you consider to be the most exciting or enlightening aspect of working with heat maps of the discovery layer?
Anyone want to take a stab at it?
I'll go.
Okay.
I think it's what we touched on in our takeaways of we were able to see where people were actually looking, and this coincides with both the website and the study room project. We were able to see where people were actually looking, and then when talking about the website, we learned that in asking people's opinions or what they prefer or what they liked about something, it necessarily wasn't always what they were actually doing on the screen. So it was kind of just a way to see what people were actually doing compared to what they were saying to us. And so that was a big takeaway. With the study room project, it was interesting to see where the people were looking for information. And that coincides with the website too. Where were they looking when they got onto the search page? And it was just really fascinating information that we obtained.
Thank you.
I'll also say that it was pretty interesting to work with that technology and see how much work it actually is to learn about the hardware of the glasses. You have to learn how to calibrate people. You have to learn, like, once that recording happened, I think they were typically 5 to 8 minutes. Then all that data would be processed for maybe, I don't know, an hour or something like that. It wasn't like readily available. So then it would go into another software program, and there was different reports that could be generated. It wasn't like what I imagined, oh, we'll just do heat mapping or use eye tracking glasses. You think it's going to be a very simple thing, but it's actually quite a bit more complex than I would have imagined at first.
Well, thank you. We do have a question in the chat. And this question is, do you have a plan to expand your research and share so others could use the knowledge gained?
Could you be more specific about expand our research, like do more eye tracking or write more details? Oh,
And yes,
okay. After doing that, like I said, it was a lot more work than a regular usability test, and we did get good results. I guess if we had an intriguing enough project that we could think of to test, that would be good. Another tricky part of these eye tracking glasses is what we're actually comparing, what the heat mapping actually compares to a still image. So when we were showing you that heat tracking, it wasn't like we could freeze a live thing. You know, you almost have to test something that is not moving, which is a little bit tricky with websites. And there are other types of glasses, I know, but yeah, we would have to think about what we want to get from it. So if you have ideas, we would like to work with you, sure. And Hytham and Kara, if you want to jump in, I don't know if I said that. Maybe you could clarify what I was saying.
Oh, I think you touched on a really good point of, as we stated, Professor Zwo was building her skills around the using eye tracking technology. And she was, in that learning process, it was very important to start with very, basic images or topics to study, I guess is a way to say it. We had all of these ideas of, okay, they go to the main page of our website and then do a search and then go through there. And that wasn't even possible to get really good, effective data. And so we had to make still images so that each person could get an equal measurement of where their eye was going and it wouldn't vary. And I think that was probably one of the most important things, that like having a moving website, having moving things made too big of a variable in order to get a good measurement, in the small amount of people that we tested. So there were things on the back end that we really had to tighten up, such as using still images and things like that to get really accurate data. So there was a lot to think about. And based off of I'm gonna add one more thing. Based off of the last question that we just had, we had set this presentation up as we had discussed about our eye tracking process that we went through. And then it has shifted to how our collaboration has kind of exploded before our very eyes into all of these other wonderful projects and opportunities. So in terms of, sharing our story, there is many different dimensions that we could share. And so if there is something that our, fellow libraries and things would find interesting from this, in terms of either our collaboration and process or the eye tracking process, or all of it, we would like to know.
Carrie, I don't know if you want to go back to the slide with the study room entrance that you designed.
Yes.
I mean, it's interesting because once we came up with something that we all liked, And Professor Zwo also helped us quite a bit. We submitted it to our university communications, and they had opinions as well. So it evolved even after we worked on it, which was kind of cool to see. So I think we're all pretty happy with how it ended up.
And the interesting thing about that too is, you know, as the further changes happened, as Ann just said, with university communications, people that weren't necessarily on the inside of the project, I was able to use elements of our data to, you know, either state our claim that we need something a certain way, or we need to remain true to, you know, these certain elements that have to remain. And when everything was all said and done, nobody had any issues or anything else to say about it. Everybody has really liked how this turned out, and that was really interesting. And to me, it showed a really good process happened. That, you know, people communicated along the way, and, you know, all of the data and information was compiled, and, you know, it was output into this final design. So I was very happy with that, and you could see it.